welcome to episode 299 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford.
Ash Baker.
And joining us today for the first time, Juliana Ramsey. Juliana, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, what's up?
Well, we're going to give you a nice jam-packed episode. We're going to be wrapping up our Filmmaking Element series with 2019's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. We're going to talk a little bit about the sound design for this one as we head into our 300th episode, which I know listeners are probably wondering how intoxicated we will be for that that catch up. Also, though, time will tell. You may have got a little bit familiar with Juliana. They had a review on the site, The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, from a couple weeks back. You can check that out on cinematary.com. We also have my Q&A with Sophie Ramvari and Mike Thorne on Some Kind of Connection, as well as our most recent piece, which comes from Jessica Carr, and is a selection of 6 short films that played at the South by Southwest film collection thing that Amazon Prime did. So a lot of stuff we got a lot of good writing coming up in the next few weeks and such.
We got an essay about Scoob coming next week.
Looking for that.
The one and only Logan Kenny.
It'll either be the best Scooby-Doo or just general movie of all time, or it'll be like an efface to the Hanna-Barbera name. You can find out on Monday. Well, let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And Andrew, I'm going to lead it off with you and I. We both caught a kind of movie, kind of performance art piece that has been circulating around the internet recently. And I'm going to go ahead and toss it to you to kind of explain it, since you are writing a review on it.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult thing to explain, but
it is.
It's called.
I'll help you.
It's called My First Film, and one of the things that's confusing about it is that it is not actually the first film by the director, but the director is Zia Anger, and the way that I've kind of been pitching it to people is it's a live stream screen share performance film. So she does it live. You have to be on a live stream with her, and she can only accommodate so many people at a time because it's an interactive experience too. So every now and then on Twitter, she will just tweet that, hey, there's going to be a performance of my first film, like tomorrow at 5 or tomorrow at 1. Fill out this Google form if you want to join, and then once there is enough people in that Google form, she cuts it off. But one of the ways that it's interactive is that as soon as you jump on the live stream, you're looking at her desktop, and she has like her Apple Messages app open, as well as a little sticky. There's the Apple Stickies app. She has a long sticky note on the left side explaining how she wants you to interact with her throughout the film/performance. And the first thing you do is text her, and then your text shows up on her Messages app, and she sends you a random video that she later explains is one of her archived Snapchat stories or Instagram stories, I think.
Instagram, yeah.
Yeah, and because you can see the Messages app and you can see other people's phone numbers, she then asks you to take the video that you sent and send it to other people. So you're like constantly getting this stream of Instagram story videos out of context that are often very funny and often very bizarre and inscrutable. And then after...
I got one that was like spoofing Hereditary.
Oh, good. I got one of her... she was wearing a long skirt, and she reaches into her skirt and she pulls out the hockey. What do you call the thing that you hit a hockey puck with? A hockey stick, and it's just like she keeps pulling it out. It was hilarious, but
they're great.
After a little bit of that has gone on, then she kind of starts the thing proper. And what the thing proper consists of is her opening QuickTime and playing her actual first film, which was called Gray. She made it as a cinema studies grad student at some university somewhere. and also having the text edit app open on the right side of the screen. And she's letting the movie play, but she's also kind of giving you a commentary about the movie through text edit. So she's live writing about the film, and she has sort of a script that she goes through every single time, but there are also little wrinkles in it every single time, and she kind of interacts with the audience in certain ways, and will respond to like technical difficulties that are happening live. Everything happens a little differently every time. She also like skips through the movie. She'll skip over scenes she thinks are boring. She'll go back and rewatch stuff if she wants to. It also kind of depends on her mood. Like today when she did the performance, she was in a really bad mood and really missing her dad. So she like watched a scene that had her dad in it that there wasn't, like she doesn't usually play, but she just wanted to. So it's kind of this living, breathing thing. And it's very much about the process of making a first movie and like the risks that are involved in making a movie, and how you kind of have to put your friends and family in awkward and in sometimes dangerous situations to get these movies made. You have to like beg, borrow, and steal to get the funding for them. And then at the end of the day, you may be left with something that no festival wants to play. And there's this whole like metaphorical arc to the project, where she kind of compares a abandoned film or a failed film to an abortion, because the film that she's showing is about abortion, and she had another one while she was making it. So there's like a lot of thematic like substance to think through and chew on top of all of the like really interesting cutting edge like distribution, presentation, quality or features that this thing has. And Zach, I actually didn't know that you were in the audience watching this alongside Jesse and I until after it was over, and I saw you log on Letterboxd. So what did I miss? What were your thoughts about the whole thing?
No, this is the funny story about figuring out that you and Jesse were on. Was I was going through the different numbers that, like you described at the beginning, where you have the different text and sending stuff. And I typed in one number and it pulled up into my phone, Jesse Alva. And I was like, holy shit. It was cool. I really enjoyed this. I felt like, this is very much a interactive piece, that kind of a performance piece that people could probably roll their eyes at, because it does sound like it's like trying to manipulate you with a lot of different things, and she's pretty open about a lot of that stuff. And I think that, like you had described, the spontaneity of it really does change it up, because you don't really know. I'm probably going to at least watch it one more time just to kind of get a sense of the various degrees of different experiences that you have, because I think that that's the interesting part of it. The thing that I was thinking about a lot through it, you mentioned kind of the process of filmmaking and just the process of making a film and then sending it off to a festival, but I also was just kind of thinking a little bit about just the kind of artist intent and like all of the behind the scenes, for lack of a better phrase, that is happening in conjunction with what's happening on screen. So you have, like you described, you have the split screen effect, and you're watching this finished film where you're watching all of the parts, and it looks like any other normal, movie that you watch. And then you have the text that she's breaking down. It's not like a director's commentary necessarily, where you're watching like, David Fincher just kind of talk about, blah, 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 this is what happened, because a lot of personal stakes were invested in this movie, and a lot of very traumatic things happened to her over the course of this entire experience. It was interesting to kind of look at what was going on for her mentally, and I think one thing I get when talking with people about movies, especially when you're talking about like the quote unquote message or whatever of the movie, I think a lot of people like to believe that movies are just kind of made in this vacuum, and you can be like this raging Republican, but you can make a movie and it doesn't have any of like that ideology, or you can be like a born again Christian or completely Buddhist, and like all of that ideology does not go into your movie. You just make the movie completely unbiased, and I don't think that's true. I mean, that doesn't happen, and it's not like that necessarily is happening here. But I felt like it was an interesting example of how the personal and just the nature of being human through the directing process, how that kind of sprays over into the final product. And so you're watching this final product that is pretty refined, and you wouldn't think that any of this stuff was actually happening, but there's one sequence where she's breaking down this very traumatic event that happened involving an actor in the scene and all this stuff, and you're watching this you couldn't tell any of that from the scene. And I thought that's kind of what I was thinking about, was just like the way that whether we want to agree with it or not, that the director and all the people on set are bringing all of their own baggage into this narrative. And so it's all kind of this messy conglomeration that it's kind of interesting to see what's actually happening to these people while this very manicured, manufactured narrative is taking place.
Yeah, I mean, I think all that stuff about the ethics of handling actors is very much in there. You guys talked about it a little bit on your episode about The Handmaiden at the end of last year. It's something that gets brought up most of the time when people are talking about like Blue is the Warmest Color. But also one that doesn't get mentioned a whole lot is that Carl Dreyer shooting Joan of Arc was like a really grueling director for Falconetti, getting that like highly emotional performance. So like thinking through that like thorny situation or that thorny dynamic is definitely a subject of this film or performance or whatever you want to call it. I want to go back to a couple of other things you said, Zach. You were talking about the unique effect of like this text edit commentary, which is very different from the normal DVD director commentary we're used to, which is something that she could do if she wanted to. I mean, at the end of this thing, she pulls up the photo booth app and is looking at the camera, and like the microphone is on, you can hear her typing, but she's not talking to you. Like she could easily just talk to the screen, but she doesn't. She writes everything out, which I think produces a slightly different and in a way like more intimate effect. Like we are getting her thoughts in a way that it feels more I don't know. I think people in many cases like feel more comfortable sharing certain things in writing than they do out loud, and I think that
absolutely
having that like barrier of distance kind of helps her be super vulnerable and help the whole experience be very intimate. And, to go back to what you were saying about wanting to see how the thing had changed, I mean, I know about some differences because I also sat in on a quote-unquote rehearsal of the thing 3 nights ago, I think, because she was getting ready to do the first ticketed performance of it, and she just wanted to make sure she had all the kinks worked out. And so there were huge differences between what I saw, including like the biggest thing is like I didn't see the whole film. She only went through maybe 15-20% of it, and kind of skipped around a bit. But I also looked up an article from Hyperallergic about this project from May of last year. There was a bunch of screenshots in it of images that I didn't see at all. So this has changed a ton. She's been working on it or performing it since 2018. It was originally done in auditoriums live with people. And of course she can't do that now, but this kind of project is sort of a perfect type of film or visual art for the moment we're in with everybody quarantined in their homes. For not least of which because like with thousands and thousands of films at my fingertips with streaming, I often will just watch nothing because I can't decide on what to watch. This is a thing that, like, it is happening at a specific time. There are only going to be a specific number of performances of it, and then it is gone, and you can probably never see it again. So it feels much more like an event, like a cinematic event, than just like Trolls World Tour getting dropped on Amazon. You know, like Devika Girish wrote an essay recently about, I think it was called I Think We're Alone Now, about the loneliness of movie going or movie watching in the present age. And she talks about like a film's availability is not the same as a film's arrival. And I think that Zia Anger's movie it definitely feels like a movie you urgently have to watch now, that I really appreciate. It's one of my favorite things I've seen in quarantine by far.
I agree with you as well. I think it wasn't a project necessarily conceived through quarantine, but I think it's a very project of the age. And if you can check it out, find her on Twitter and see if she's doing a performance at some point soon. And I really, it's really kind of an interesting experience to I mean, I was in here with like the shades down and like darkness, like watching the thing, and it was as close to like going to the movie theater as you could probably get, even though I was watching it because I felt like it was necessary. I was watching it like on my laptop because that felt right for this type of thing.
Yeah, and you're looking at somebody else's laptop screen, but it feels very cinematic.
I co-sign everything you said. I'm going to toss it over though to Juliana to initiate her into the first part. Tell us a little bit about Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah, so Interview with the Vampire, I watched it for the first time, I want to say like 2 weeks ago, and then I watched it again like basically the next night. It's from 1944. It's from 1994. Like big blockbuster vampire movie based on a book by Anne Rice. I want to say this came out in like the 70s, 73, 74. Is it a good movie? That's debatable, but I would say like as like a blockbuster vampire movie, it kind of hits all the hallmarks for me because it's like horny, over the top, emo, like crazy high budget. It stars Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, and also Kirsten Dunst is in it. So yeah, basically the plot of it is Louis, I want to say in like the 1750s, is a plantation owner. His wife and child die in childbirth, and so he kind of goes on this like Binder suicide kind of thing, and then Lestat, who's played by Tom Cruise, turns him into a vampire. And it's all kind of in this frame narrative of he's telling the story to this guy in like in present day, like in the 90s, basically to warn him like, hey, don't become a vampire, blah blah blah, all this horrible stuff happens. But yeah, and then I'm trying to think of it. It is an interesting movie because Anne Rice, who wrote the original book, also wrote the screenplay for it. Her first ever screenplay, which I think should be punishable by law, because that'll tell you like all of the issues with the screenplay. Because it's like, I think that they move like locations in this movie. Like they start in like rural Louisiana, and then they go to New Orleans, and then they sail around the world, and then there's like in London, and I think they go to Paris, and like it's one of those things where you can tell that the writer of the book was like, I'm not leaving out any single scene. So it just like leads to a bunch of like weird choices where they're trying to like speed through all of it. So like that was kind of weird. And then also Brad Pitt, honestly the casting is really good in this movie. Tom Cruise's Lestat is like honestly amazing. Tom Cruise is one of those actors that his face bothers me. Like there's something about him that just kind of gets on my nerves, but like he's totally disappears like into this role. There are like Lestat as a character is so hilarious because he's sort of this like, he just sort of tortures the main character Louis throughout the whole movie, but he's also the comic relief. So there's like a particular scene near the beginning where Louis is a wet blanket the whole movie, and he's like doesn't want to feed on any people, like basically like vampire vegetarian, um, and is like starving himself essentially. And the stat is like really annoyed by this, so he just picks up a rat off the floor and then squeezes it like a gusher into a wine glass, and then just drops the dead rat body back on the floor and is like, "Here you go."
Oh my god.
Just like as they're in conversation, and Brad Pitt with his, oh my god, the costumes for this movie are so hilarious because they always have like this luscious long hair, and Brad Pitt is wearing this like little French press-on manicure because all their nails are really long.
Yes.
Right now, Ash is going, how to stream interview.
Oh yeah,
with
I put it on my watch list while they were talking.
Yeah, no, it's
Juliana, I'm curious. I mean, one question I have is like, it's interesting to me that this movie came out 2 years after Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. And I know you've seen it, though you're probably not as high on it as we are based on your Letterboxd rating. How does this compare to that?
it is I would say, like, it has actually, because I listened to the Bram Stoker's episode, and this one actually has some cool visual effects too. Kirsten Dunst plays like a little girl vampire that, which this movie has a lot of like gay undertones, but Louis and Lestat like raise this little girl vampire together. But there's a scene where she's turned into a vampire and her hair goes from like limp to curled, and it's so crazy looking, but it's kind of less on the like visual effects. And definitely it doesn't have the kind of like dreamlike touch that Bram Stoker's Dracula has. It's a little bit more, I don't know. The whole movie is just kind of genre confused because like there are definitely moments that are like high melodrama, like to the ceiling, and then there are some moments that are just like pure rom-com. And like in particular, there's a scene where basically Louis is to the point of starvation, and so he wanders into a part of New Orleans where there's a lot of people affected by what I presume is the Spanish flu. And this is where they find Kirsten Dunst's character Claudia, and she's like clinging to her mother's body, who like presumably just passed away, and so he starts like attacking her, and apparently like Lestat has followed him into there, and so like right before he kills the little girl, he's like, "Ha ha ha, I can't believe you did that." And then picks up the mother's body and like starts waltzing around with her corpse like Weekend with Bernie's. And yeah, like this is like an important moment for the main character where he's literally like on the floor sobbing because he's, you know, like started eating this little girl, and the other main character is just like nee. And so I'm like, should I be laughing? Like this is like so weird. But I feel like the reason that I like this movie is because it's like it's almost a fixer-upper. Like there are definitely aspects of it. Like I understand like why the book and the movie both have like fans, because it has some really good moments in it, but it is just like such a puzzling movie that you're like, I want to figure this out. Like this movie could be improved so much. But yeah, and then the last kind of like bit I have about it is like Louis, even though he's just sad, kind of sad the whole movie, he just is like spends the entire movie embroiled in guilt that he has to kill people basically in order to survive. But the first 20 minutes are spent on his plantation because he's a literal slave owner, and then it's never addressed again. So you're like, I kind of don't feel bad for you because you literally own people. And they couldn't have like put anything in the frame narrative to like talk about it. It's never addressed, it's completely dropped, and you're just sort of like, okay. But yeah, so I would say it's a fun movie, not without its flaws. And you know, if you want that over the top melodrama, It's a good watch.
Is Brad Pitt playing a slave owner? Is that like a... Does it connect to 12 Years a Slave where he plays a slave owner also? Like, is there a crossover?
I think
cinematic universe?
I think there should be.
Twist is that he was
That's
a
awesome
vampire
if that's true, you know. I mean, he's just fixing a roof in 12 Years a Slave, so I figure, you know, they don't want to dive too much into the lore, you know. I don't know.
You'll know in 12 Years a Slave if there's a close-up and you can see his little press-on manicure.
Okay.
Then
all
you'll
right.
know.
I'm gonna rewatch it. I'm gonna rewatch
Enhance.
just to find that. I'm gonna have to rewatch the whole movie though. Cool. Well, is Interview with a Vampire streaming anywhere? Ash, do you know? Because I'm sure.
Yeah, I would love to know.
Okay. Is it streaming anywhere?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, it's one of those that I've seen.
I think I watched it on. Yeah, I think it's on Amazon, but you have to like rent it or like pay for it or whatever.
Yeah. That's how I watch most of my movies, to be honest.
Well, Ash, I'm gonna toss it over to you. You have a double feature of. You have the yin and yang of lesbian dramas.
Yes, in honor of our Portrait of a Lady on Fire week, I'm doing yes and no lesbian movies for part one.
We're starting with no, right?
We're starting with no. So, speaking of Brad Pitt, I just earlier was reading a gossip column that was sort of like questioning whether Brad Pitt and Aaliyah Shawkat are just friends or something more. And Aaliyah Shawkat is the star of this unfortunate lesbian movie Duck Butter. Duck Butter is streaming on Netflix. It is from 2018. It is it is about two women who are dissatisfied with the dishonesty they see in dating and relationships. And so they decide to make a pact to spend 24 hours with each other, hoping to find a new way to create intimacy. And so basically, this movie starts out and we have Aaliyah Shawkat, who I recognized from an episode of Broad City from a few years before.
Have you not seen Arrested Development?
Oh no, I haven't watched Arrested Development.
She's a very integral part of
okay.
Yeah.
So there we go. Arrested Development. But I had seen her in an episode of Broad City, and she's been in a lot of other stuff actually. But yeah, she's in this movie, and basically she plays a young aspiring actress who's just landed a rather small role in an indie movie. And she sort of like screws up the first day, and it sort of like feels like that cringy sort of TV like Broad City humor, basically. Not as like loud as Broad City, but you know, just like that ha ha ha, like, you know, uncomfortable situation humor. And so basically she goes to a bar with her friend, and she meets this gorgeous Spanish girl who sings a song and kisses this woman in a crowd, and is just like wowed by her spontaneity and her beauty. And she goes home with her, they talk, and they're like, wow, relationships are so stupid. We should just spend 24 hours together getting to know each other and like eating chips and drinking juice and having sex, and we can just skip all the hard parts of a relationship. And so at first I got on Letterboxd, but like in the beginning of when I was watching this movie, and as you know, as is something that I do, and I saw that our good friend Paige had given this movie like a 0.5 star, and had said, Paige, who like loves lesbian movies, and had said like this was agony or something like that, to that extent. And I was like, wow, you know, it doesn't seem that bad to me. And then I kept watching, and I was like, I was just like checking, I found myself checking the clock fairly often. And it's an hour and 30-minute movie, but it just felt so long because what we had was just sort of the same conflict over and over again, which was, one of the girls would get mad at the other for a seemingly unfounded reason. The other one would sort of bring them back around. They would have lots of powerful sex, and then they would like talk about something kind of cute and funny, and there would be some comedic humor, and then one of them would get mad at the other again. And this sort of cycle repeated itself for as long as I could bring myself to watch the movie. And yes, I did stop watching the movie eventually. Juliana, you saw this movie, right?
What? I have, yeah. I actually finished it, but I watched it like with my roommate, so we kind of got through the end. I mean, honestly, self-care, just stop the movie. It's just like...
I think that's the poster tagline.
If you're not feeling it. Yeah, basically. Yeah, it's one of those things where you just watch them have a bunch of sex and fight about just completely stupid things and keep doing it. And it's like totally that like manic pixie dream girl, like not the Aaliyah Shawkat character.
Yeah, the Spanish girl,
I don't remember her name. Mm-hmm. It's just like, yeah, you should free yourself. It's cool. Let's hang out. Like, fuck your job. And so it's just like, it's this like kind of weird fantasy, but I don't know whose fantasy it is. Somebody's, not mine. Right. So it's just, I don't know. It was very, and also the titular duck butter. Oh yes,
the duck. Like, should we talk about the duck butter?
I am really curious.
Okay, so duck butter. In the movie, they explain or they compare. Oh, this is so disgusting. I'm so sorry that I'm about to say this. You're gonna have to like bleep me out afterwards for the podcast. But like,
just do it.
How should I put it? Pussy juices.
Yeah, we draw the line at that on the Cinematary podcast.
And also,
you should have given me warning. This is unacceptable.
If this was the Romeo and Juliet episode, that would have to get bleeped, but we'll leave it.
Yeah. Well, it's just such a disgusting...
It's the Wild Wild West now.
It's so disgusting. Why would you say duck butter?
Also,
So they're just comparing that to duck butter, or is there actual duck butter in the film?
Well, if I remember correctly, the Spanish woman is telling a story about, I think she like went over to her boss's house.
Yes.
And like had sex with him. And like he either like made a comment or like refused to have sex with her because he was like, "Oh, you have a lot of duck butter."
Yeah.
It's so weird. I think it was supposed to be sexy. Like to the other character, but I'm just like, okay, okay, I guess.
Yeah, that's what happened.
So that's the no. What's the yes movie?
So the yes movie. Oh, and one more thing about duck butter. It's not that I don't want something like this to happen to me. For the record, I would love to meet like a beautiful Spanish girl at a bar and like stay up for 24 hours with her. So just putting that out into the universe. Anyway, not a great movie. Would love for that to happen to me. Anyway,
just for anyone listening who might be able to arrange something.
So great movie. On the other hand, we have Bound, which is directed by our Wachowski sisters. We love them. We just talked about Speed Racer last week. And I was really excited to watch Speed Racer because I had watched this one just before. And Bound was in 96. It was, if I'm not mistaken, before The Matrix.
Yeah, it's their first
feature. Wow, that's so impressive. honestly. This movie was so good. Okay, so this was one of my favorite things I've watched during the quarantine. I love like a good like suspense gangster movie, and
It's kind of a heist.
yeah, it's kind of a heist thriller gangster movie. I've been watching The Sopranos a lot lately, and it sort of gives me like a little bit of like Soprano vibes. And even the guy from The Sopranos is in it, Joe Pantoliano. And he's incredible, and I love him in this movie because he's such an idiot. And so basically what happens in this movie is Joe Pantoliano, I'm butchering that, but he plays this guy named Caesar. And Caesar and his girlfriend, and it's sort of...
Jennifer Tilly.
do what?
Jennifer Tilly.
Yes. She's played by Jennifer Tilly. Violet is her name. She is just like cute as a button in this movie. Just like so good. So they show up to this apartment, and who is repairing and renovating the apartment next door but our butch queen Corky, Gina Gershon. Yeah. And Corky is just like your fuckboy butch lesbian who like wears a white tank top and has like the hair and like dungarees and big boots and tattoos, and it's like mattress on the floor type, just like, and so, so Violet comes over and is like, well, hey there. And Corky's like, what are you trying to do? Do you want me to fuck you or something? And she's like, yes, of course. And so she's like, okay, well, come have sex with me. My bed's basically on the floor. And so they like, they do it. And anyway, so they fall in love, and it's beautiful. But Caesar is in the mob. And so what they do is they decide to like run a con on the mob and pin it on Caesar so that they can be in love and run away. Because basically Violet's a kept woman by Caesar. She's like basically held against her will. It's really terrible. He's a terrible boyfriend. It's really ugly. But it's just such a wonderful movie because like all of the drama is just so like good, and the action sequences are just so suspenseful, and it's just like it's everything. It's like The Sopranos with the representation we want. It's so good. Just go watch it.
I mean, honestly, butch lesbian Sopranos is like that's a beautiful dream I'm glad exists in the real world.
Oh, it's so good.
It is also, like the other Wachowski sisters movies we've talked about, extremely well directed. And
yes.
like every new angle that they find to shoot this apartment complex in is incredible.
Yeah, it's a beautiful looking movie. And sounding and everything. Everything about it's good.
Very cool. Is it streaming anywhere?
If you look in the right places, sure.
Yeah. Real quickly, Andrew, tell us about Fanny and Alexander.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and go as quick as I can here to talk about a 5.5 hour movie in the
you've done it before.
We have before part two. Have you heard the good news about Fanny and Alexander by Ingmar Bergman? This movie exists in two cuts. There is the quote unquote theatrical cut that is already 3 hours, and then there's the quote unquote television cut, which is as I said, 5.5 hours. Both of them are on the Criterion Blu-ray, and I assume the Criterion channel if you want to go watch them. It's a movie that I've owned for a long time because I've known that it's like an art house Christmas movie, and I've been planning on watching it in the lead up to Christmas for like 3 years now, and something has always gotten in the way. But after a certain amount of quarantine days passed, I was just like, fuck it. We're watching Fanny and Alexander.
I was going to say.
I watched it alongside Michael O'Malley, so he had his own copy, and we just kind of watched a little bit of it every day. This thing was originally shown on TV in 4 installments, so 4 different nights of television, but it's structured a little differently than that. It's structured in 5 acts, so it's kind of Shakespearean. It also has a prologue and an epilogue. There are several Shakespeare-y things about this. Act 2 is largely a performance of the ghost scene from Hamlet. There's also a wicked uncle / stepfather character who may or may not be a murderer, which kind of reminds you of Claudius from Hamlet. But broadly speaking, what this movie is about, it's about a huge aristocratic family in Sweden whose patriarch is this celebrity actor / theater owner, and he dies halfway through. So spoiler alert for like 2 hours into this thing. That guy dies, and then the titular Fanny and Alexander are this guy's kids. So you're just sort of seeing their life and how their life changes after their father dies. Their whole way of life gets uprooted when their grieving mother remarries this very severely religious bishop who is committed to like giving up all worldly possessions. So they're aristocrats who live in this gaudy, luxurious mansion, and they have to go live with him and his like hovel, basically. And the latter half of this film in the bishop's house is this very properly creepy gothic melodrama that has like big dramatic thunderclaps after certain lines of dialogue. It's also kind of a domestic horror story along the lines of the Bluebeard fairy tale or Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, which is kind of an adaptation of Bluebeard. And underneath all of that genre-trapping stuff, it is about several different ways of practicing religion. So the first half of the film, we're spending time with a basically secular family as they are doing religious traditions. So it takes place at Christmas. The first scene is a nativity scene. There's somebody who reads out of the Gospel of Luke at one point. But like for the most part, what this family is doing is just like raucous drinking and dancing and sex and like putting all of their vices and like family troubles on display. So not an actual like spiritual family. They're just kind of like culturally Christian, right? And in the second half of the film, we have someone who takes their religion so seriously, this bishop character, that there is no sense of like joy or wonder or beauty in that religion whatsoever. So he's just very firm in making sure everyone under his roof follows all of the Bible's commandments, and he kind of turns his house into a bit of a prison in making sure that happens. And like the way that these locations are shot is really like where a lot of the thematic richness of this movie comes from. So the secular family's home is just luxurious and colorful and just full of stuff as far as you can see. It's often shot with this really deep focus, so you can see multiple layers of adjoining rooms, like one after another, kind of going on forever. The bishop's house, on the other hand, is very flat. It is dark. It's gray. It's made of hard stone. It offers no comfort or happiness. So there's this paradox here where like the more religious person is like not accommodating, whereas the secular like fake religious family seems to have so much more joy and meaning in their lives. But there's also this third type of spirituality in this movie, which is like this non-denominational world of spirits that's just wandering through the film. The movie's almost like a magical realist story in just how much supernatural stuff seems to be just hanging out around the margins of the film. The prologue, for example, has a scene where a statue in the family's house just like starts moving around unexplainably. There's a moment where the Grim Reaper shows up and then quickly steps out of the frame. There are several ghosts that show up and haunt the character Alexander several times throughout the film. There is this really mind-boggling miracle that happens near the end that I do not want to spoil. And there's also a very long scene where a character recounts this extended Jewish parable that Bergman may or may not have made up. And the film sort of, as this parable is being described, it kind of drifts into this dream space that gave me the same kind of like sublime religious experience that I've really only ever gotten out of Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life. So he really makes you wait for it. That's like 4+ hours into the movie, but it is absolutely worth it. Absolutely beautiful. And if you watch this movie, you should definitely watch the long version, the 5.5 hour version. Watch it over multiple days if you have to, but this is the version that you gotta see because to my understanding from the research I've done, it seems like the theatrical version cuts all the supernatural stuff out whatsoever. And Bergman had to cut like 2.5 hours out of this thing to make it play in theaters. And he is quoted as saying that he quote, had to cut into the nerves and lifeblood of the film. And I completely agree. I think that sense of like magical spirituality that imbues every inch of this thing is very much the point, and that's where like the pleasure of watching it comes from. I mean, Bergman throughout all of his filmography is someone who's very interested in religion. Obviously, I think his dad was a minister. He kind of went on and off with his own religion, his own Christianity over the course of his life. And this is a film that it was near the end of his career, and it's a movie that seems to like reject most forms of like organized or orthodox thinking about spirituality, but sort of accepts that there are like these larger and incomprehensible spiritual powers in the world. That is, I mean, the way that it's conveyed is just, I mean, really gripping. I think this like works as a piece of like crackpot Pulp Fiction at times, or like crackerjack Pulp Fiction, but also like is deeply like spiritually resonant and like satisfying in that way as well. I think that, for all the really nice things we said about Zia Anger's movie earlier in this podcast, I think this is the best thing I've watched during quarantine. I was hesitant to watch it, but I am really, really glad I did. And if anybody is like me and they've had this on the watch list for a long time, but they've been cautious to take the plunge, you got to do it. It's so good. Fanny and Alexander, Ingmar Bergman on the Criterion Channel. Watch the 5.5 hour version. It's great.
Well, during the break, we're gonna talk Andrew through the fact that it is not December. We're not near Christmas, so we'll work through that during But we're gonna take a quick break. We will be back talking Portrait of a Lady on Fire in part 2 after this.
Hey, Cemetery listeners, Andrew here. At the midpoint of this week's episode, I want to direct you to some of the non-podcasty things we have to offer. First, if you're a fan of what we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon. For $5 a month, you get 3 things: a shout out at the end of every episode, the opportunity to choose a movie we cover on the show, and our Patreon exclusive podcast, Film Theory and Chill, in which we look at a piece of theory once a month, deconstruct it, and then just chill out, talking about whatever else we have going on. All Patreon support goes solely to paying our writers for their reviews that go up on our website every Monday. Also, at the bottom of Cinematary.com, you can sign up for our free newsletter. Every Sunday, we send out an email with the latest podcast episode, Patreon content, and written reviews. This is perfect for those who want to keep tabs on what's happening, but might be too busy to see the posts when they go up. Before I go, one more quick thing. The easiest thing you can do to support us is to give Cinematary a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to the show. This is quick, free, easy, and we will read your review out on the show once we get it. To recap, consider donating to our Patreon, sign up for the free newsletter, and please give us a rating and review. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show.
back with part 2 of episode 299 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be concluding our filmmaking element series with 2019's Portrait of a Lady on Fire, or 2020's Portrait of a Lady on Fire, if you want to...
Who knows what year this movie came out?
It all...
And, depends on whether or not you're going by its awards qualifications trainings or its actual, distributor deciding to release it on a day. So... yeah, if you want to call it the best movie of 2020, I will not argue.
I'm just going to call it a good movie. Written and directed by Celine Sciamma. The film stars Naomi Merlant and Adèle Haenel. And it takes place in France in 1770. Marianne, a painter, is commissioned to do the wedding portrait of Eloise, a young woman who has just left the convent. Eloise is a reluctant bride-to-be, and Marianne must paint her without her knowing. She observes her by day to paint her secretly. Sciamma, on the film's love story, in an interview with IndieWire, she said, "We want people to have their heart broken and think about themselves, but enjoy this experience of this strong love story. But it is also about the memory of a love story. It's a lot about the present, the rise of desire, but it's also about what's left of a love story. What's the memory of a love story? There's these two timelines that sometimes are contagious, contaminating one another. We are trying to propose another politic of love, whether it's not about possession or donation or eternal love or death or eternity or whatever. It's more about love as a dynamic that can grow, that can only grow." Frickin' French people, man. What the hell are you talking about? Sciamma, continuing on the romantic plot in an interview with RogerEbert.com, she said, "I wanted a love dialogue that was also an artistic dialogue. It's a film about love and art and love for art, and how love is an education to art, and even a curation for our future curiosities, and how art can console us from lost love. To me, that is a very strong dynamic. As cinephiles, as lovers of cinema, which is a very democratic art, we know that feeling. Everybody has a film that has helped them. Talking about women artists, I wanted to show a new power dynamic within a love story, but also new power dynamics in artistic collaborations, and depart from this iconic tradition of the muse being the silent, fetishized woman. Most women then didn't have the opportunity to make art. Some of them did because they were daughters of painters or wives of painters. But mostly the opportunity they were given to be in the workshop of the painter was to be a model. They seized this opportunity and they put their brains into this work. It's about showing the history of art from a woman's perspective, showing a woman artist at work, but also showing a model at work." The New York Times said, "A subtle and thrilling love story, at once unsentimental in its realistic assessment of women's circumstances and almost utopian in its celebration of the freedom that is nonetheless available to them." The LA Times said, "What makes it a great movie, rather than a list of ideologically correct imperatives, is the specificity and delicacy with which Sciamma has shaped the material, the way each new idea seems to emerge from the love story like a whisper." And Time magazine said, "It's a great example of how a well-told story with vivid characters can seep right into your bones and keep you thinking for days afterward, and the pleasure felt while watching it isn't negligible either." So let's jump into Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Now this episode specifically is about the sound design, because I think that this is kind of a quality that, if you've seen this movie, maybe it didn't necessarily jump out at you at first. I know this is actually a quality of the movie that we've talked about from our TIFF review to kind of a recap when it was put on streaming recently, where we talked a lot about the sound design of this movie. And so, Andrew, I'm going to lead off with you, because I know this was something that you really hit on when you were reviewing the movie from Toronto last year, because it is just very specific in how it's kind of doling out the design of all the different noises and musical cues and just everything happening in this world. It all feels very heightened.
Right, and full disclosure, I actually have not rewatched Portrait of a Lady on Fire for this episode specifically, but I saw it at TIFF and I saw it again when it played in theaters in early March. So I'm mostly going to take a back seat and listen to y'all talk, but sound design was my main takeaway when I saw it at TIFF. It's a thing that I haven't heard enough people talking about, but I do think it is the primary mode by which this movie operates, the primary technique by which it kind of taps into something in your brain. It's kind of similar to, I don't remember if you guys talked about this with No Country for Old Men several weeks back, but one of the interesting things about that movie is that there's no score whatsoever, and the credits play with no music, which is kind of jarring. Portrait of a Lady on Fire has a similar approach where there is music, but there is no non-diegetic music, and it is also taking place in a very remote area, in the fairly distant past, in a very quiet world, a quiet landscape. And so sound, the like intrusion of sound often makes a really big impression. So this movie kind of brings all the audio levels down to an absolute hush, which I really liked the quote you said, Zach. I don't remember who said it, about like the ideas this movie come to you almost like a whisper. I think that's kind of the mode we're operating on here. And when everything is just so hushed and everything is just so quiet, small sounds take on a greater significance and take on a greater, like you notice the small sounds that you wouldn't notice in a busier audio mix. So this could be just the footsteps of somebody across a stone floor. This could be the crackle of the fire as someone is warming themselves as they've they're drying themselves off. You hear the crashing waves that are coming from the distant cliffs outside. Also, like, sidebar, there was a really good tweet by Girish Shambhu out of TIFF where he was talking about specifically the use of off-screen sound. You're often hearing sound effects of things that you are not looking at on screen, and that kind of creates this larger atmosphere, this larger texture of the film, this like oral space it is in, if you will. But there's also more like, so that those are kind of the sounds that sort of make up the environment of the movie, but there's also sounds that kind of signify the central relationship of the movie, and you kind of like see the tension in that relationship build. So one of the ways in which this relationship gets built is through the construction of art, through painting. And so the movie spends a lot of time really close to the canvas, listening to the brush strokes. And I think the first shots of the movie as the credits are playing are like different zoomed in brush strokes. And the way that you can kind of hear these brushstrokes in such a quiet film kind of triggers that ASMR sensation in your like on the back of your neck. And then there are like more like intimate, romantic, and sexual noises in this film that like feel like they have a greater presence as well. Like someone trying to pretend they're not breathing as heavily as they actually are, but we can hear it because the audio makes it so open. So yeah, I mean, it's a movie that is very much about restraint. Like, not only the cinematic approach is very restrained, but it's set in a historical time period when women are very restrained in terms of what socially acceptable behavior is, and of course, like, queer relationships are sort of outside the public imagination in many cases, or in most cases. So like the audio mixing of this movie being so restrained, and like these tiny little like sensory sounds kind of like poking through the mix are kind of, to me, like how the movie affects me on a sensual level. So hopefully that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. Juliana, what about you? What struck you while watching this film about kind of how the sound is utilized to kind of express this desire between the two characters?
Yeah, a lot of similar stuff to what Zach was saying, and also just like, I think that sound design that's so restrained like this can also kind of give you a volumetric kind of understanding of where they are. Like, the shoes across a stone floor, it echoes, and you understand how kind of empty and like how big the rooms are in this. But one interesting thing is I watched this very recently over Zoom with some friends who were not familiar with it. I had seen it a few times before. And about like 15 minutes in, when Marianne, however you say her name, is like exploring the house on the first night, they're like, is this a horror movie? Which was like totally struck me because the few times I had seen it, it was like that kind of ASMR, like it just felt, it was somber, but it kind of felt like relaxing to me. But I was like, I kind of understand that reaction, especially, if your frame of reference for movies is like big blockbusters and like that really restrained, no score thing could be like a tension. But it honestly kind of makes sense because in some ways this movie is like a ghost movie, because it's all through this lens of like her looking back and remembering, what this thing was. And I know that in like the first scene, in the classroom scene, when she's like starting to remember like her on the boat, you can actually like hear the crashing of waves before the scene shifts, which I thought was like a really nice touch. And yeah, it is interesting, like all of the kind of sounds have an affinity to each other, like the brushing on the canvas and the crashing of waves and like all these kind of sounds similar, that like white noisy type thing.
So speaking of like horror adjacent stuff in the soundscape, one specific that we can maybe hone in on is the scene with the titular fire, where they show up to like what almost feels like a coven of women who they do this chant, they sing this song together, and when you first hear it, it doesn't sound like voices, right? Like it sounds like one of those like pure frequency tones, like that would play over a color bar screen. But like a lot of them stacked on top of each other, and then it just like rises and rises and rises, and you kind of like feel like your heart in your neck because you're like not sure what exactly is happening, and then like it becomes clearer that these are human voices, and it becomes very like beautiful and communal in the way that these women are able to like put their voices together to create this like otherworldly sound. I don't know, that's a standout moment for me in the film.
Yeah, I mean that moment really struck me. I mean it really kind of it freaked me out at first, but in a moment it becomes a very, as Andrew was saying, like a beautiful thing. And that moment still sort of sticks with me because I'm like, what? Like, I guess it's so, like, it's just like a question that sort of lingers. It's like, why is it like so sort of like abject at first? But also that sort of reflects the whole feeling of that scene and what's going on between the two characters in that scene. But I think the thing that stuck out to me most about the sound design in this film was, obviously agreeing with what you guys have said already, but I think that, going back to some things that Andrew said, like the way that it's so hushed and the way that we can, like those small sounds sound or feel so much bigger. A lot of the sounds that really stuck with me from this movie are like tactile. They're like, just like people, touching things like fabric and like obviously the canvas, but
there's also all the dresses,
clinking dishes together or cooking, or there's that one scene where the sort of chambermaid goes to get an abortion, and the mother figure who's performing it is like rubbing rubbing her hands in these like herbs and like mixing up this like witch sauce and like she's just like grinding up these herbs in her hands, and just like all of these sounds are just like so like big. And
but also like when the proportion is being performed, of course we're not seeing anything, right? It's a close-up on the face of that maiden, or that what did you call her before, like a maid, chambermaid. Yeah. Where it's a close-up on her face, and so like all of the discomfort and like the medical equipment being used is kind of conveyed to us through sound there.
Yeah. And so it just sort of like it feels so like because, as you were saying, also like they're in this remote place, in this not only like a remote place but such a big place. Like the rooms are so enormous, and when they're outside, like the place is so big. Whenever they're inside, you hear a lot of echoes for all the sounds that they're making, and whenever they're outside, you can just hear like, you know, like obviously the ocean, but like birds, and like it's all distanced. And I think like whenever we move on to like those later scenes, when she's not in that space, it feels a lot more, like the sound feels a lot more closed, I guess. Whereas like, as if like the love story part, I guess, when it's happening, has a feeling of like simultaneous, like obviously it's very tactile, but there's also like a sense of it being like echoed away at the same time because of the space and the sound that's being like all the like reverberation, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. I actually watched all of Celine Sciamma's movies prior to rewatching Portrait of a Lady on Fire when it ended up on Hulu. And this kind of the way that she uses sound is pretty uniform across her movies. The way that she utilizes it is in a very, it really does breathe that kind of intimacy or loneliness to a degree. You know, I'm thinking of the way she kind of does a similar thing in Water Lilies, her first film, where you'll have like a scene where Adele Hanel, the actress who's actually in this one as well, is in this large kind of busy locker room, you know, for the swimming team, and you have the one girl who's infatuated with her, who you don't have any like score or anything else. You're just kind of watching her face, watching the others, and it's a very simple, basic filmmaking technique. But the fact that she doesn't utilize any music, or doesn't utilize the kind of basic manipulative tricks that impose an emotion on us, and we're able to kind of glean that empathy for this character just through that kind of white noise silence of just a room chattering. You get that a lot, in this as well, where it's all the intimacy there is just in that silence. It's you're because you don't have any music, it kind of tells you like how much music influences how you're supposed to feel about a scene or a sequence or just a character. Because in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, you're constantly having to kind of understand each character as they're understanding one another, just kind of by observing them. And I feel like that's such a powerful technique. It's kind of ironic that her most effective sequence, at least in this movie, or in this particular movie, but also I feel like in maybe her films at large, is the diamond sequence from Girlhood, where the characters in that movie just kind of have this full length dance sequence in their hotel room to Rihanna's Diamonds, which is just kind of ironic that that's like such a, I think, kind of pivotal scene in her filmography up to this point. When looking through, whether it's Water Lilies or Tomboy or Girlhood or Portrait of a Lady on Fire, she just this kind of lonely, empathetic, melancholy silence is very prevalent through all of those movies.
And I think the use of real music from our world is interesting, comparing Girlhood to Portrait of a Lady on Fire as well, because like, of course, like Diamonds is a song that you would hear like with girls partying alone together, right? In this, we're living in a world with before recorded music, and so. And also, like, going to see live music performed would be a luxury. So there's a scene where both characters are sitting at a harpsichord and talking about classical music. And I don't remember which one says that they've never heard performed music before. I guess it's Adele, says that she's never been to the symphony before. So the other character like plays her this classical piece, Storm, or I forget the name of it.
It's by Vivaldi.
Yeah. Oh no, it's the Storm section of Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, right? And there's just so much like pent up emotion in that song, or in that not song. I'm going to get the same comment Zach got on his video essay. It's not a song, it's a classical piece.
It's not a song, you asshole!
But there's so much pent-up emotion in that piece that it goes unexpressed for most of the film, living in such a quiet and restrained world. And then the last shot of the film, incredible shot of Adele watching a symphony playing that exact song and seeing the small, subtle but important changes in her facial expression as she's just like carried into different emotional registers by the music. And then of course, like, we know what all the resonances are for her. So there's an interesting way in which, like, not only we, the audience, are kind of like engaging with this movie on a sonic level, but also we are seeing characters relate to music in an interesting and significant way.
Yeah, I feel like in the end scene when she's like listening to the music, because earlier when the other character was playing it on the harpsichord, she's like, man, I can't remember how the rest of this goes, and kind of stops playing.
Mm-hmm,
you can see on her face, like when you get right to the part where she stopped, like this like amazing smile comes on her face because she's hearing it for the first time, and it's like it's part of that like sort of discussion that Sciamma's having about like art and memory and how we use art to remember things, but then because in the character's mind that piece was what she heard on the harpsichord, and now she's hearing it in a completely different way, and it's like this like transformative thing for her, and she's also thinking about her relationship. So it's just like an amazing moment to like end the movie on.
Yeah, I mean, sound is so abstract that you can kind of project lots of emotional experiences onto it. You have to like fill in the gaps of what it means to you. So yeah, it's interesting to think about the characters doing that with the limited music that they have.
I feel like this is sort of a diversion from the sound discussion, but not really. I feel like we would be amiss if we didn't call attention to the Orpheus discussion, which I found just like obscenely powerful. Even though
good,
it's
so
like, you could be like, oh, that's on the nose. It's like, fuck you, I don't care. It's
Literally.
it's just like that discussion of, like, I guess just like straight up like literary analysis that's happening at the table. And then the moment that, you know, the moment when, what is her name? The brunette.
The one who's not Adele. I forget too. Marianne, yeah.
Yeah. So she's leaving or whatever, and Adele's like, turn around. And I was like, bitch, what?
Yeah. And it's like a perfect ending, right? Like they could have ended it right there.
Yeah.
But then Siama gets like a second, even more perfect ending.
Yeah.
No. There are 3 perfect endings. There's the perfect ending of like the Orpheus turnaround ending. Then there's the like the painting with the number, is it 23 or 28?
28.
Yeah,
oh my god, I'm getting it fucking tattooed on my body.
And then the Vivaldi Four Seasons performance is the 3rd perfect ending of this movie. But I think it's significant that she chose to end with the sound centric ending, right?
Yeah. It's just like there's just so much to say. Well, it's just the way that what Zach was quoting earlier about it being about like love and art and love. It's like not only is it like all inclusive when it's talking about art, it's like here we are, you know, painting, and we're doing music stuff, and we're talking about literature, and you could argue that they're play acting because bitches be gay, and and so it's like very all inclusive when it comes to like the art and the artiness of like the like what the film pays attention to and like what their love and sort of brings to life, but also, or, you know, fuels their love maybe, but also like, where was the second part of that? I don't know.
Well, I kind of want to tie this a little bit into what we were talking about with like the sound design and the intimacy, because I know even though this maybe doesn't directly relate to the sound design,
relate it
I
somehow.
know
I've lost my train of thought.
It somehow does, but this is something that we've talked about with any movie of similar ilk, whether it is The Handmaiden or Carol or any other recent LGBTQ plus examples of films. I'm curious, this is for Juliana and Ash, on your perspective on the lack of explicitness in the sexual scenes in this movie, because Siama makes a decision to pretty much cut to the aftermath rather than, you know, show any of the actual sex being had. So I'm curious on y'all's perspective on that decision.
Juliana, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm trying to think. I didn't really think about this a lot with in regards to sound design, but I feel like there's always been like kind of an issue with particularly lesbian movies and the like people who see them just to watch people having sex, and so there's like a kind of a trade-off where you're like, maybe you want to show like kind of those types of scenes and those types of experiences, but you don't want it to be kind of objectified, and so I think it's fine for her to make the decision to like cut away, like not include it. Like there's a little bit, I mean, there's like a particular like, there's like sort of a non-explicit like sexualness, like when they do what I assume is like old-timey LSD. The
Oh my god, that was
drugs.
so good.
And also, this is a total sidebar, but I love the whole like, your eyes are so big, like you and your partner just like messing around, like smoking weed, basically. But yeah, just like the fingering the armpit kind of thing. I feel like it worked with the way this movie was. I feel like it also could have worked if it was more explicit, but that's definitely like a line you have to walk as a director depending on like the content of your movie and like how you want it to be received.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think when we talked about The Handmaiden, you know, like,
I mean, haven't we all?
yes,
You did say you
I
watched
did.
it
I did
during
say
our
that.
lesbian
I will
sex month.
own that. That is what I said, and I stand by it.
It's on brand, sexy people things. It's fine.
Yeah, but you know that movie, I think we sort of discussed in that episode like how like that's like thematic for that movie to be explicit, considering like the nature of that narrative. And I think the nature of this narrative is like to be restrained.
I think it's about the desiring, but not necessarily about the getting, right? It's all the lead up and then also the afterglow.
Yeah.
Like those are kind of the two worlds the movie wants to operate in.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. And it's not that like I think it would have been bad to be more explicit, or I think it would have been bad to be less explicit. It's just like I honestly think it was sort of like a perfect amount, but I don't think I don't know, like I think that it was pretty balanced. We got like, we got some like great kissing in this movie. So I mean, like, I'm not complaining about it. So
good spit sound effects on during the drug makeout scenes.
Great spit, yeah.
They're in the armpit drugs.
Listen, I don't know what that was, but I want to do that.
Yeah, for real.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I have a final thought, and it's not an original thought. It's actually stolen from film critic William Bibbiani, but he pointed out that if you've seen any of the marketing for this movie, either on Twitter or like digital ads on Hulu, distributor Neon is marketing this as the greatest cinematic love story ever told, and like every critic is like, sure, you can have it. Like, no, there's no outcry, there's no protest. Yeah. This is not necessarily a hyperbolic statement. Like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to argue, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, their love lives on.
I mean, who are we going to give it to? Leo and Kate Winslet on that freaking boat? Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah. Though, maybe this was kind of based on Titanic, or at least inspired by Titanic.
Oh,
which is interesting.
Celine Sciamma loves Titanic. I've read interviews with her talking about Titanic being an influence, which one blind spot for me is I've actually never seen Titanic, so I need to see it, and was reminded I need to see it in listening to Celine Sciamma talk about it.
Yeah, it was just funny. She's in interviews. She's like, Titanic is a lesbian love story. I know it's straight people, but like it's it has the vibe or whatever. And I was just like, you know what? Yeah, go for it. You made a great movie. Say whatever.
Queer the canon, Celine.
Oh, she's my hero.
So good. And also another sidebar, but I think that this movie was like, she talked about it like semi being based on her real life love story with the blonde main character from this movie, Adele Haenel, because they had worked together before on Water Lilies, and sort of like how their relationship was like surrounded by this love of filmmaking, which was like very, very much a beautiful kind of context. But
yeah, and like navigating a real world relationship that starts as like a muse artist dynamic and looking and being looked at the same time. There are definitely resonances there in both stories.
Yeah. I think the woman who plays... Wait. Her name is Heloise. Her name in real life is Adele.
yes,
This is true. I'm
We're
just
only at the end of
shorthand.
at the part.
Okay.
We're good.
it's all
Well,
French.
She's
so who cares?
she's probably like the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my whole life.
Agreed.
It's really painful. The first time you see her, it's just blinding.
Can I just say, hot take? I think the other one's more attractive.
Well,
I think
You're straight.
Ash talked about Jennifer Tilly in part 1 of this episode, and I think that's disrespectful.
yeah, you're straight, Zach. Keep your mouth
Get
shut
out.
on this episode.
Gotcha.
This is our playground.
Yeah. Well, on that complete shutting down of my insight on the movie,
I could add one more thing.
As the host of this, I'm gonna
Or
shut it
I could
down.
add one more thing that's on theme,
No.
and that was Ash,
Okay,
when
fine.
you were talking about the Orpheus myth.
Yes.
It made me realize and remember that it's the sound of her voice that like makes him turn around,
Yes.
and he's looking forward and he's
yes.
not looking
Good.
at her. So
Yes.
we're on topic.
Yes, and I'm looking at them, and I think they're both just absolutely drop dead.
All right. I'm just saying, personal preference.
I guess
Alright.
you're allowed to have bad.
Jeez.
Zach likes brunettes, we get it.
Whatever. I'm the host, and I'm ending this freaking episode if that's what it's going to be like. You can find Portrait of a Lady on Fire on Hulu if you would like to watch it, and then it will be on the Criterion Collection. They're releasing it, I believe, next month on Blu-ray, so you can find it there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @cinematary, and on and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinematary, where you put all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Also, check out our Patreon. We'll probably have a new Film Theory and Chill coming up soon, and yeah, we'll have a lot of, we'll try to add in some, more goodies to the old Patreon page. This coming up next, this month.
Ooh, yeah. We have an idea for some like live watch parties and post movie discussions coming up. So
Get on that Patreon game, baby.
game.
Thank you to Cam, Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Cindy Roberts, Gotham, Harry Eskin. Is it? Yeah, hell yeah, small. They changed it again. Hell yeah, small world. Joe Jordan, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Ron Hayes, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, yes, it is the 300th episode. We'll I think we'll be a little bit more sober than we were last time.
With any luck.
With hopefully, because honestly, that was, if we had like a behind the scenes type situation on that, it was just a horrible time for most people. It was just, there was a lot going on. So, but we'll probably have a movie exchange like we usually do. So, it'll be long. I feel okay about it being long this time because you're in quarantine. You got nothing else to do. So, let's do it.
Have you already mentioned? Sorry if I missed this. Have you already mentioned the Young Critics poll and how people have less than a week to do that?
No, I have not. So, I mean, we've posted about it on social media, but yeah, the Young Critics Watch Old Movies poll is still live. You can find it on Cinematary's website. You can check out our Twitter account. We've been tweeting it out and such, but yeah, vote for that. We'll be announcing the lineup at the end of the episode 300. So we're about we've got a decent idea on a couple movies, but there's some close races, so get your votes in and let us know what you want us to watch. Yeah, again, cinematary.com. But thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.